Hey folks, walk with me. Well, it is fall. It's actually relatively late October, and we're having an incredibly unseasonable, warm, sunny day here. I'm sure you can see the sky behind me. It's beautiful, and of course then the thought goes, it's a great day to go out for a walk, and if we want, record some video. But what that also means is now I'm restarting this video for the third or fourth time because everyone else is out and some of those people are doing very loud things. So let's hope that this time, third or fourth time is the charm. So this video, I've been alluding to this one for a while if you've been watching some of the videos on this Walk With Me series. And to give a little background, I think the earliest recollection that I have of this was when I was in, elementary school of some sort. I ordered a book. I don't know what the impulse was even to order it, but I ordered a book about the disappearance of D.B. Cooper, who, if you're not familiar, was this dude who hijacked this airliner, I think Alaskan Airlines maybe? Don't quote me on that. But over the Pacific Northwest, he landed the plane. He had the plane land, got some money. The plane took back off, and he parachuted out the back with the money, and was never seen or heard from again. And that was sort of like my first foray into just being really curious about, alternative options for things, alternative realities, if you want to say that, and just sheer mysteries, right? That one's just a sheer mystery. And so then I got really interested in Coast to Coast AM, hosted by the late great Art Bell at that time. And strongly recommend you look up some of Art Bell's videos if you're not familiar. He is tremendous. And that's just very much a lot of conspiracy, a lot of secret society, a lot of New World Order and paranormal stuff on there. And I've just always been interested in sort of humanity's want and capability to express themselves creatively, if whether you want to think of it that way or not, express themselves creatively through concocting these alternative versions of reality or alternative versions of an event, right? And sometimes just really making stuff up, sometimes having many grains of truth, and oftentimes somewhere sort of in the middle. But it still is sort of interesting, just the capacity for it. I don't know how loud this is gonna get, but we'll see. So, and then I've also been interested in it from the perspective of people who buy into this stuff, right? Especially people who are just sort of hook, line, and sinker. They'll believe any conspiracy. And just what the psychology of that is fascinating to me. So, coming to it with that sort of intrigue and interest, I landed upon the QAnon conspiracy. Now, admittedly, I got to it pretty late. I became aware of it in spring or so of 2020. And at that time, I was living in this sort of community, and there was sort of several houses kind of close together. And in my little section, my little courtyard, was a guy who I would talk to every once in a while. I wouldn't see him that often. It was mostly small talk kind of stuff. But 2020 was an election year, and at some point, I think during small talk, there was just some sort of acknowledgement that it was an election year and whatever. And he said at some point something to the effect of, well, I don't even think there's going to be an election. And I was like, huh? And he said, well, I don't think that Trump is really sort of running a standard race, or is sort of getting elected in a standard way. I think he was installed by the U.S. military. and again, I said, say more. I don't know what you're talking about, but this is wacky and I'm into it. And he went on this whole thing about the white hats and how there were these people entrenched in the military for decades who had just been waiting for a time to install the right president, and that they were gonna like take the country back or whatever. And then of course got into like the missing children element of the whole thing, and Nasara, and and so I just sort of took all this information in and then went on my own hunt down a rabbit hole with it. And I don't know exactly what his role in the whole environment was, but I suspect he may have been what were termed as bakers. And these are people who would get information from these drops on one of the chans, and they would basically get the information like everyone else would, but they would have some sort of, I don't know, I don't want to call it special knowledge, but they would they would sort of be steeped in this world in such a way that they would be able to decipher the meaning behind this information that was dropped from Q. And Q was reportedly this high level, right, highest security clearance individual in the US government who was helping to disseminate this information to people. I don't know for what purpose, maybe to just sort of have some camaraderie when all this started to happen. But that he was dropping these hints and this bits of information on the chans. So I suspect that this neighbor of mine was a baker, that he would get the information, he would, you know, essentially garble all the stuff together and then post his take on what the coded information meant. But I just remember, you know, I never went on the chans. I still don't really know how you go on the chans. It's probably not that complicated, but I didn't want to try to figure out all the nonsense. But there was this site, I think it was called like Q Alerts app or something like that, which I would just view it on the web. I didn't like download an app or anything, but you know, so they would come through there and then people would just start going wild and talking about stuff. And the thing that one of the things that seemed just very apparent to me very quickly was how insanely bought into it all of these people were, to the extent to which my neighbor in a separate conversation said, if all of this turns out to not be real, I've wasted the last 3 or 4 years of my life. And he was not a young man, and he had at least a kid that I know of, if not grandkids or multiple kids, I don't know. But yeah, so in any case, so people were sort of like that level bought into it though, right? That, I mean, it sounds hyperbolic to say wasted all these years of my life, but we always wondered what the guy did. And so the idea that he was in there just sort of like keyboard warrior, you know, master Q baker, kind of makes sense. But yeah, I think it took over a lot of people's lives, ruined a lot of relationships between people and their families because they became so staunch in their conviction. And so that was like very apparent from just sort of like going on and just reading through this like web page aggregator of the drops. And then it led me to this site called the Donald.win, which I think no longer exists. I don't know. I should have thought to punch it into my browser before this video, but it didn't occur to me. But on there, that's where I started to get the sense of like, you know, this is not going to go down well. And this was after then Biden had already won the election, and you know, there was all of this purporting of this was unfair, unsafe, it had been stolen, yada yada yada. And I just remember thinking, okay, these communities are very tight-knit, if not, you know, there is a very likely and very obvious Venn diagram here of overlap of Trump supporters, QAnon believers, and people who are just not going to let this go. Especially as he's like fanning these flames of this, you know, highly conspiratorial, you know, full government sort of takeover. And yeah, it was just obvious to me. So I said to my father-in-law at the time, who was really not a Trump fan, I said, you know, what do you think he's going to do, meaning Trump? Because I don't think that there's any way that he's going to let this changeover to Biden occur without like doing some crazy stuff. And he was like, what is he going to do? He can't do anything. It's over. He can say whatever he wants, but he can't do anything. Well, then January 6th happened. And this was my moment of, yeah, I knew that it wasn't just he couldn't do anything. He could do as much as he could think of, and that was about it. But that was a lot, right? And so that's where Q sort of led me. It was just this very apparent place of like, these people are not going to stop. They are so invested in this. They are so certain that they're correct, and that they can't stomach the idea that they could have been misled for this long, especially being misled in the context of the whole conspiracy is that the whole country is misled, right? And yet they find themselves being duped by a completely fictitious thing. Now, my suspicion in the aftermath of it all was that the Watkinses were likely the progenitors of the drops, at least once it moved onto the Chans. I can't remember where it had originated from, where there's speculation that Paul Ferber was the one who was running it. It's totally slipping my mind, but yeah, that's, you know, I don't know that they'll ever prove it, which is also kind of crazy, but I would be really surprised if the bulk of the activity from a certain point forward was not being controlled by the Watkins, Ron and Jim. I'm pretty sure Jim Watkins. So yeah, but it was so interesting to be embroiled in the middle of it with an already interested ear to conspiracies. You know, it feels like they were always sort of like older things, right? Like things that had already happened, and this was just happening in real time at any moment. Information could get posted from Q, you know, Q drop could occur, and that was just super interesting. But you know, in the aftermath of it, really sad for a lot of people. My neighbor, notwithstanding, I don't know, he moved away shortly after, so I don't know whatever became of his involvement in it or his interest in it. But you know, really sad for those people to feel as though they lost a good chunk of time to this whole thing, and for all of the strife and discontent that it caused within families. Like, I know families, or I've heard of families that have just been ripped apart by it because Uncle so-and-so or my dad or, you know, whomever got really wrapped up in it and wouldn't stop talking about it, wouldn't stop badgering people about it, and no one wants that to consume 98 to 100% of their conversation with a family member. And yeah, so really unfortunate that way. I'd be incredibly surprised if whoever was behind the whole thing cared at all about the destruction and the damage that was caused to individuals and the families of those people, because they, I don't know, wanted to drive traffic, thought it was funny, they wanted to troll, whatever the reason. But adventurous in the most benevolent of settings and destructive in probably a more likely setting. All right, folks, so this is, I think, our longest one yet. 16 minutes on the walk. So if you walked with me, we probably are closing in on a mile. And if you didn't walk with me, no worries. I certainly appreciate you watching all this way. And as always, I will see you in the next video.